His Majesty King Bhumibol Adulyadej of the Royal Kingdom of Thailand is the world's only monarch who was born in the United States. He was born at Cambridge Hospital, presently Mount Auburn Hospital, on Monday, December 5, 1927. His Royal Highness the Prince Father was a medical student at Harvard University at the time. The Prince, his consort, and the royal children were living at 63 Longwood Avenue in Cambridge. Upon his graduation as Doctor of Medicine cum laude from Harvard University in 1928, the family moved back to Thailand. His Royal Highness the Prince Father passed away 1 year later. The royal children started their primary education in Thailand. In 1934, the Princess Mother took her children to reside in Lausanne, Switzerland, a suitable place for their health, education, and lifestyle as commoners. His Royal Highness Prince Bhumibol Adulyadej succeeded to the throne as monarch of the Royal Kingdom of Thailand on June 9, 1946. The royal wedding between the king and Mom Rashawong Sirakit Gittiakon took place on April 28, 1950. The coronation of the 9th king of the Royal House of Chakri was held in 1950, when His Majesty was 23 years old. His Majesty the King, accompanied by Her Majesty the Queen, made 2 state visits to the country of his birth. The first was in 1960. The American press was greatly impressed by His Majesty's fine, modest manner and sense of humor. He was also admired by American people everywhere he went. At certain events in the royal program, their Majesties were accompanied by the royal children. Their Majesties were received with pomp and ceremony on arrival in Washington, D.C. by President Eisenhower. While there, His Majesty also addressed the U.S. Congress. His Majesty was overwhelmed as he visited Cambridge, the city of his birth. He was warmly welcomed by Mount Auburn Hospital staff. His Majesty, conversing with Dr. W. Stewart Whitmore, who delivered him, and the nurses who assisted at his birth, along with Anne C. Mitchell, who was born there on the same day. His Majesty posed in front of the golden plate, which certified that this was the room of his birth. Their Majesties proceeded to 63 Longwood Avenue, once the royal residence. On the occasion of the royal visit, a formal reception and banquet was held in Their Majesty's honor at Sheraton Plaza Hotel by the state of Massachusetts, as well as Boston Municipality. Delivering a speech, His Majesty said, "Boston had much to do with me. I was born here. My mother and father studied here. I come here as a private citizen, as a human, to see my birthplace, to see the things you do here, and to feel your spirit of freedom." Arriving in Manhattan, New York City, New Yorkers gave their Majesties a grand welcome, including the traditional ticker tape parade along the entire route. His Majesty joined a music session with Benny Goodman, the king of jazz, at the latter's apartment. Royal visit to the New York Stock Exchange. The second state visit was made 7 years later, in 1967. Their Majesties presided over the ceremony of presenting the traditional Thai pavilion to the East-West Center, Hawaii. In New York City, their Majesties went by helicopter to visit the Pan Am building. They were greeted upon arrival by Mr. John D. Rockefeller III and his wife. Their Majesties received the Thai community in audience at the Plaza Hotel. His Majesty presented the Metropolitan Museum of Art with an ancient Thai sword. Their Majesties visited the United Nations headquarters. In Massachusetts, Williams College conferred an honorary doctorate in law on His Majesty. His Majesty delivered an address during the ceremony. In Los Angeles, His Majesty visited the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, where he observed the model of a Surveyor spacecraft and its missions to the Moon. Their Majesties attended the Grand WAIF Ball. This was followed by the royal trip to Washington, D.C., where their Majesties were greeted with pomp and ceremony by President Lyndon B. Johnson. His Majesty inspected the Guards of Honor. A gala dinner was held in their Majesty's honor at the White House. His Majesty went to Arlington National Cemetery, where he laid a wreath at the late President John F. Kennedy's grave. Visiting the Space Research Center in Maryland. Viewing the satellite for communications and weather forecast project. In Washington, D.C., their Majesties had a luncheon on a Potomac River cruiser hosted by the Secretary of State, Dean Rusk, and his wife. Their Majesties departed for Thailand with Secretary Rusk seeing them off. Through His Majesty, the cordial and friendly ties between the Royal Kingdom of Thailand and the United States of America have been flourishing. To commemorate the 60th anniversary of His Majesty's ascension to the throne. Wat Nawamintararachutis NMR Meditation Center was built in Massachusetts, the state of his birth, as a tribute to His Majesty and a memorial of merits where Lord Buddha's teachings, Buddhist studies, and practice are offered. It would also function as an American Thai and international cultural exchange center, as well as a place to enhance people's morals. That leads to peace of the entire world. May this memorial sustain the well-established friendship in the years to come.